This is the 2023 Ariya, the brand new EV from Nissan, and it comes with a futuristic design both inside and out. But the question is the future looking bright, or is this new design language from Nissan the way forward? Before we find out, let's talk about some of the spec and tech. Big thanks to Jacob and Craig of Empire Lakewood Nissan in Lakewood for letting me film this beautiful Ariya for you guys today. Check out this Ariya and their entire inventory down in the description, or go to empirelakewoodnissan.com. The Ariya will be offered with two different battery sizes. You have a 63 kWh battery as standard and a larger 87 kWh pack as an option. You can configure these with either front or all-wheel drive. The range is pretty decent in the Ariya. You can get up to 304 miles if you go with the front-wheel drive configuration in combination with the larger 87 kWh battery pack. 0 to 60 miles per hour takes about 7.5 seconds in the base engage trim with its 214 horsepower single motor, but will be closer to about 5 seconds for the top of the line dual motor 389 horsepower Platinum Plus E-Force. The Ariya is capable of charging at home on 110 or 240 volt outlets, as well as public charging stations and even DC fast charging ports. On the inside, this is where things get really interesting. You have a dual 12.3-inch display setup for both the gauge cluster and the infotainment screen, all housed within this S-shaped screen. More on this when we get into the interior design section later in this video. Standard features include Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. You have built-in navigation. You can get the Ariya with wireless smartphone charging and head-up display if you tick those option boxes. Base price for the Ariya comes in at about $44,000. It is finally here, guys. This is the brand new EV from Nissan, and this is called the Ariya. It came out as a concept in 2019. And look at the concept, and then you look at this, and they look pretty much identical in a typical EV fashion. I think a lot of EV shows, or new concept EVs, shows pretty much exactly what the production version will be. And this color here, I want to talk about this beautiful color. It might look black on the camera, but I'm gonna try and capture this gorgeous color because it shifts from black to very dark foresty green that you can see here, and it just pops. It has a very special tone to it. So I'm just gonna jump straight into the design of this thing. I think this is a beautiful looking EV. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of these coupe SUVs, but in this case I think the proportions, they just work. Looking at the front, let's start in the front end here. We have a big grille with this V-motion shape in the front end with some Kumiko inspired patterns here. You can see that it fades from here and then becomes more and more aggressive as we go into the far end corner of this end here. And then you have these beautiful daytime running lights that stretches across the entire front end down and kind of houses the grille. I'm going to talk more about this integration in just a minute and what I would like to change on that specific detail, this light here. And then you have normal headlights. You don't have any bumper headlights sitting weirdly down here. They sit nicely up here, creating a nice base for where the graphics then starts underneath it. You have the new Nissan logo in the center that is illuminated. Down here, it's very hard to see. It's barely noticeable, but you have an LED fog light down here, of course, in the other corner as well. Otherwise, it would be a very asymmetrical and weird looking car. And one thing I love about this design is if we look at this section here, super clean design. Compare this, for example, to the Nissan Leaf, which if I were to think of a generic small city hatch EV, that would probably be what the Leaf would look like. It doesn't really have a personality, but in this case we can clearly see that this is a Nissan. And one thing I love about this specific design language that we have here is that we have the return of chamfers around the graphic features. And when you have chamfers like this around all the big key graphic features, it makes the graphic features feel like they have a home and that they were intended to be where they are. And I love this line going in here, and then we have this super smooth surface up here, very beautifully done. And then you have some functional air vents right here. You also have functional air vents or intakes for the cooling down at the bottom. If there's one single thing I could change in the front end, it would be to have the LED that goes into the grille on the sides continue underneath it and really hammer in the V-motion design. Let's go into the most important view for any car, in my opinion, when you want to get a hang of the proportions of this thing. So as you can see, we have a very sportback design, but as I said, I think it works with these proportions because this was designed from the beginning to look like this. It wasn't just a GLE SUV that they then cut off the rear end on, which makes the proportions look very weird. It makes the car look front heavy. That's not the case in this Ariya here. And I love this sharp shoulder line that we have going all the way across. No weird things or dips happening in this. And then this entire surface right here is all flat. It gives it almost an architectural feel to this design that looks very futuristic. Nissan themselves called this Japanese timeless futurism, but it still works. It feels like it has some emotion in it and still retains this automotive design feel while still looking pretty digitalized and EV-ish, but in a very clean way. So it's a nice combination of the two categories. Now let's talk about these wheels. So these are the 19-inch wheels, which gives you a range of 272 miles on one charge. However, if you put larger wheels on this car, yes, you're gonna lose a little bit of range, but to me, that totally does not matter. In this case, if you decide to go with the 20-inch wheels, which obviously I think looks a lot better, you're gonna lose, listen to this, 5 miles of range. So you go down from 272 to 267. And to me, I'm totally okay with having that loss of range for some proper wheels on here. However, I think these wheels is kind of a new take on this aero look of EV wheels, and I think they look pretty good actually for what they are. Now, this is a very dark color here, so you can't really see the blacked out cladding, but we have blacked out here, and then this lower section is also blacked out, and the roof is also blacked out on some trim levels, and I think that also helps with the volumes of this car, makes it feel a lot lighter and sportier when you have that, specifically when you have it in a lighter color than this. Normally, I'm not a fan of silver or kind of chrome trim pieces, but this line that we have going right here, I think this adds to this design for some reason that I can't put my finger on what it is, because that's the only thing in the entire design that has this silver aluminum feel to it. I think it kind of makes everything else pop more when you have something that is a little bit different than anything else on the rest of the car. Specifically looking at it from a side view, it also emphasizes this sportback feel, because you can see how it dips here while we still have some mass above it, but this kind of fades away because we have this line being so much in contrast with the rest of the surroundings. Last but not least, we have to talk about this rear end. I think it's a beautiful looking rear end, and we have a similar treatment of the lines here that we have in the front end. For example, this line right here then goes into this cut line, creating a nice chamfer. And as I said, I love that we have so many chamfers coming back in this design. Even though this was probably designed, if the concept came out in 2019, this style is probably from somewhere around 2016, 17, but I hope they keep this style because it makes for a much more high-end looking design. We also have a nice chamfer here. You can see that we don't have the Nissan logo in the middle. Instead, we have the Nissan letters spelled out, which I think looks really cool, and they sit behind this glass panel here in combination with, of course, this big light bar. And I think this light bar, it looks pretty dynamic because it changes thickness right here. So it goes in, becomes a little thicker, and then in the middle above the Nissan letters, it becomes thinner and then comes back to thicker on the other end. Down at the bottom, we have some reflector lights in this big old diffuser down here. Same clean surfacing that we have all around the car. They didn't add a lot of styling, curves, not even anything for the license plate, which is pretty unique. I think this way of just smacking the license plate on top of a smooth panel without any integration for it, a chamfer for example, is very rare, and I think in this case it actually looks pretty good. It cleans up the rear end. And up top we have this gorgeous wing that kind of sets the design off nicely when you look at it from a side view, and it's actually functional. So you can see my hand sticking down right here. We have two openings with a slot in the middle. Looks pretty cool, and then you have the brake light up here as well. This is a very interesting interior. Let's just fire it up real quick so we can show you the display. Here you have the infotainment screen and the gauge cluster, the same size. I believe these are 12.3 inches each. Now, what's really interesting about this interior is something I don't think I've seen before, and these are these haptic buttons that we have sort of engraved onto this wood panel. So here you have the settings for the temperature, the climate control, you have the settings for the vent as well, and the heated windows and so on. And it feels really strange to touch these because you can feel this slight haptic little vibration when you adjust anything on here, and this same treatment goes on here as well. So we have the drive mode selection here. For example, we have Eco, Standard, and Sport. I don't know if you can hear this little tick when you're changing things. It just feels really weird, but it is a unique integration of buttons, and I think this is kind of in between having the buttons be all touchscreen or having them be physical buttons. This feels like a compromise where they met in the middle. Would I prefer still physical buttons for these specific settings here? I think so, because the problem still remains. When you're driving the car, quickly want to change, you can't really feel where exactly this button is. You have to look down from the road ahead of you to see what it is you're touching. So that's the main reason why I prefer physical buttons for the main controls of the car. But looking at this design, I think this is a beautiful integration, this bronze metal feel. Then you have the hazard lights right here, and they decided to do one feature that I think Nissan probably thinks, just looking at this design, is the most important feature you can have in a car, because it's pretty much the only tactile button in here, and that is the volume knob. So the volume knob gets front and center right here. And we also have on and off for the radio. That is pretty much the only tactile button that you have in the entire dash, which is pretty interesting. And look at this beautiful integration of the vents, how you adjust the vents. You don't really adjust the fins that are where the actual vents come out. You adjust one big wing. I think this interior, it feels innovative, it feels light and airy and spacious, and I really like what they did with this interior. Even though we have these interesting buttons, it still feels like it's something new. And we need to talk about this big giant display that I have on the dash. Pretty well integrated in the back. It doesn't have, you know, just a thin thickness to it. It actually sits inside the dash on the back, which I like. It also had this S curvature to it, and looking at the outline, we have some chamfers and we have some radiuses on it, which I think makes it feel a little more put in a little more effort into designing this car. For what it is, a dual screen setup like this, all digital, I think it looks pretty good. One interesting detail is about this center console is that you can actually adjust it, so you can move it back and forth by using these two buttons here. So now it's all the way in the forward position, and if we go back, it goes all the way and kind of squeezes the knees of your rear passengers. If you like to have it like this and more lean back, you can have the armrest in this position, or if you sit closer to the steering wheel, you can always adjust it forward and make whatever situation comfortable for you. And if we lift this armrest up, we have our wireless phone charger right here. We also have the same beautiful trim going all around the car. You can see it here, you can see it on these details, and also on this thing where you cover up the cup holders in a very beautiful way. I like the design in here. We have this wood panel in combination with the soft material with some screens and some new integrations of some interesting buttons. The steering wheel is two-spoke. We have the volume controls and the stereo controls on the left side, and the cruise control is on the right side. So let's check the back seat and how much space we have here. Legroom is pretty good, and then I'm almost hitting the ceiling because we have the cutout for the sunroof ending right here where my head could possibly fit. I have plenty of leg room, as I said, and I'm 6'1", so there's no problem here, and this is my original driving position. This is the Empower Plus. So what we have here is the front engine, 238 horsepower. Don't really need more than that if you're just looking for an EV to get you from point A to B. And it is, so far, going over some potholes here, it is extremely smooth to drive. Super nice and super comfortable, which kind of is what I would expect from a 2023 EV. all EVs I've driven so far have had this same kind of smoothness to them. And I think that's both a good and a bad thing, because it doesn't it's very hard to give an EV some sort of personality, because if you have them all feeling the same way, the only thing that's going to differentiate the EVs are the power, if it's a dual motor or a single motor, and the acceleration, obviously. But the feeling, overall feeling, you can tweak the suspensions and do stuff like that to get some sort of better feel for the EVs and have more of a character to them. Let's just floor it here for a sec. Alright, so it's decently fast, not too crazy, but again, you have 238 horsepower, so it's not the most powerful EV. Doesn't have a lot of weird noises to it like we have in a lot of EVs, specifically the EV6, where you can make it sound like a spaceship if you want to. I think you have 3 different settings. Here it sounds pretty normal. It has that EV whine to it when you're stepping on it, which I think is nice. You also have a pretty clear head-up display right in front of you. Also looks clear and crisp, just showing you the speed limit and the speed you're going. This is not obviously a track monster. This is very much an EV that should drive from point A to point B when you're not in a specific rush or anything like that. It's very quiet and very comfortable in here, and the ride is actually really, really good and smooth. You have a button here called E-Step. This is one pedal driving if you want that or not. I always prefer it on in EVs because I feel like I get more range when I'm slowing down. You can feel like it feels good to know that when you're slowing down, you're recharging the batteries. And I always like to have that on. It's also easier to drive with just one pedal. And we're coming to a complete stop now, just lifting off the accelerator. It feels a lot like a Tesla Model 3 when it comes to the stopping power of the regen braking. It's pretty good. You can definitely use it with just one pedal with no problem at all. All right, so let's check the turning radius. Super tight. One of the tightest turning radiuses I've experienced in a car like this. The size of this, what's interesting about this design is the footprint of this thing is about the same as a Nissan Rogue. However, the interior, just stepping on it a little, the interior is a lot more spacious because, as you know,
the voice prompt and get
no thanks, I don't want.
Please
no.
say the play's name.
No.
Go back. Please
Yes.
say canceling voice recognition.
Thank you. There we go. So what I was saying, this is on the outside, the footprint is about the same as a Nissan Rogue. However, the interior is a lot spacious because it is an EV after all, so you have a lot more space. You don't have the internal combustion, the transmission taking up space in here. And on the outside, I feel like this looks like a larger car than the Rogue for some reason. I think it is the proportions, overall proportions, it just feels a little bubblier than the Rogue, but not in a bad EV sense. It's a bubbly car, but it still looks distinctive and has a nice styling to it that I think Nissan should continue with their EVs. Thanks again to Empire Lakewood Nissan for letting me review this car. I'll see you in the next video.